The sapphire brooch was gone, and Thomas, a royal guard with 23 years of perfect service, was the only person caught on camera near the case. He had 24 hours to prove his innocence, or lose everything. But when he finally found the brooch hidden behind a royal portrait, he discovered something that shocked everyone. The person who saved him wasn't a detective, wasn't a security expert. It was someone the entire palace had overlooked for 38 years. Someone invisible. Someone no one suspected could solve the biggest mystery in royal history. This is the true story of the royal guard who lost everything in one morning and found it in the most unlikely place. The sapphire brooch was gone, not misplaced. Not forgotten in another room. Gone in Thomas Pemberton. The royal guard who had served the palace for 23 years without a single mistake was the last person seen near the display case where it had been kept. The morning had started like any other. Cold autumn air swept through the stone corridors of Kensington Palace as Thomas walked his usual route. His boots echoed against marble floors that had witnessed centuries of secrets. He nodded to the cleaning staff, checked the locks on the east wing, and paused at the portrait gallery where morning light painted the faces of kings and queens in gold. But when he reached the blue drawing room, something felt wrong. The glass case that held Kate's personal collection stood open, just slightly. A gap no wider than a finger, but enough to make Thomas's chest tighten. He approached slowly, his breath forming small clouds in the chilly air. Inside the case, velvet cushions held rings, bracelets, and necklaces arranged with perfect precision, except for one empty space. The sapphire brooch, Kate's favorite piece, given to her by William on their 10th anniversary, was missing. Thomas knew that brooch well. He had watched her wear it at state dinners and charity galas. He had seen the way her face softened when she fastened it to her collar, as if the simple act connected her to something deeper than ceremony. His hand moved to his radio. But before he could speak, footsteps approached from behind. "Thomas?" It was Margaret, the head of palace security. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were sharp. "We need to talk." Within an hour, the entire security team had been assembled. Camera footage was pulled. Statements were taken. And every recording from the past 24 hours showed the same thing. Thomas entering the blue drawing room at 6:47 in the morning. Thomas standing near the display case. Thomas leaving 7 minutes later. No one else had entered. No one else had touched the case. "I didn't take it," Thomas said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "I would never then explain this." Margaret turned a laptop toward him. On the screen, a frozen image showed Thomas's hand reaching toward the case, his fingers just inches from the glass. "I was checking the lock," he said. "I do it every morning. It's part of the lock was fine the night before. We have footage of that too." Margaret's expression was unreadable. "Thomas, you've been with us for over 2 decades. Your record is spotless. But right now, you're the only person who had access and opportunity. Before you go, if stories like this pull you in, make sure you're subscribed. You won't want to miss what happens next." Thomas felt the walls closing in. He thought of his daughter, Sophie, who was studying law at university. He thought of his wife, Anne, who believed in him without question. He thought of the pride he felt every time he put on his uniform and walked through these ancient halls. "I need to find it," he said quietly. "Give me 24 hours. Margaret studied him for a long moment. "You're suspended effective immediately. Turn in your badge and please." Thomas met her eyes. 24 hours. "If I can't find it, I'll resign. No fight, no lawyers. Just let me prove I didn't do this." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Finally, Margaret exhaled. 24 hours? But you're not doing this alone. I'm assigning someone to watch you." Thomas nodded. He didn't care who followed him. He only cared about one thing: finding that brooch before his reputation and his life shattered like glass. What he didn't know was that the truth waiting for him was stranger than any lie he could have imagined. The woman assigned to Shadow. Thomas was younger than he expected. Her name was Alina Marsh, a forensic investigator brought in from outside the palace staff. She had dark eyes that seemed to catalog everything and a notebook she never stopped writing in. "I need to start where it started," Thomas said as they stood together in the blue drawing room. Morning light filtered through tall windows, casting patterns across the Persian rugs. "Right here," Lena nodded but said nothing. She was there to observe, not to help. Thomas approached the display case slowly, as if seeing it for the first time. The glass was pristine. No fingerprints. No smudges. The lock mechanism was sophisticated biometric and code protected. Only 5 people in the entire palace had access: Kate, herself, William, Margaret, the head curator, and Thomas. "Walk me through it," Alina said, her pen poised above paper. "Exactly what you did yesterday morning." Thomas closed his eyes, pulling the memory into sharp focus. "I entered at 6:47. I always start my rounds early, before most of the staff arrives. I checked the main entrance, then walked the corridor." He moved as he spoke, retracing his steps. "When I got here, I noticed the case looked off." "Off how?" "The light. There's a small LED inside that illuminates the pieces. It was dimmer than usual." Thomas knelt beside the case, examining the base. "I thought maybe a bulb was failing. So I unlocked it to check, and the brooch was already gone." "Yes." Thomas's voice was firm. "The space was empty when I opened it. I stared at that empty velvet cushion for maybe 10 seconds, trying to understand what I was seeing. Then I closed the case and was about to report it when Margaret found me." Alina wrote quickly, her handwriting small and precise. "Who else knew your routine?" "Everyone. I've walked the same path for years." "Who knew you checked that case every morning?" Thomas paused. "That was a different question. I don't know. I never told anyone specifically, but I wasn't hiding it either." Lena moved to the window, looking out at the palace gardens, where early frost clung to rose bushes. "Someone knew," she said quietly. "Someone knew you'd be here, alone, at that exact time. Someone wanted you to be the suspect." The words hit Thomas like cold water. He hadn't wanted to believe it, but Alina had spoken the truth he'd been avoiding. This wasn't random. This was deliberate. "Who would do that?" Thomas asked. "I've never had enemies here. I keep my head down. I do my job. Think harder." Lena turned to face him. "Promotions you got that someone else wanted? Mistakes you reported? Anyone who might hold a grudge?" Thomas's mind raced through years of memories. The palace was like a small city, hundreds of employees, each with their own ambitions and disappointments. But no one stood out. No one had ever shown him hostility. Except 6 months ago, Thomas said slowly, there was an incident. A new guard, Peter Collins, was sleeping on duty. I found him in the portrait gallery, completely passed out. I had to report it. What happened to him? He was terminated. Security protocols don't allow second chances for something like that. Thomas felt his stomach tighten. He was angry, said I'd ruined his life. But he's been gone for months. Elena's pen stopped moving. Does he still have contacts here? I don't know, maybe. They spent the next 3 hours reviewing every detail Thomas could remember about Peter Collins. He'd been 26, ambitious, and overconfident. He'd bragged about having connections in high places, though he'd never named them. And he'd left the palace making threats that Thomas had dismissed as empty anger. But as afternoon faded into evening, Alina made a call that changed everything. Peter Collins didn't leave London, she said, hanging up her phone. He's been working private security for a company that services several buildings in Westminster, including a jewelry shop, just 2 miles from here. Thomas felt his pulse quicken. A jewelry shop? One that specializes in high-end estate pieces. The kind of place that might know how to move a stolen royal brooch without asking questions. For the first time since the nightmare began, Thomas felt something other than dread. He felt the faint, fragile edge of hope. We need to talk to him, Thomas said. Elena's expression was cautious. If he's involved, confronting him could spook him into hiding the evidence. Then we don't confront him. We watch him. Elena considered this. Finally, she nodded. We watch him. But Thomas, if this goes wrong, it'll only make things worse for you. Thomas thought of the empty space in the display case. He thought of his name being whispered in corridors, his reputation crumbling. He thought of Sophie, who believed her father was a man of honor. "It's already worse," he said. "We have nothing to lose." Asterisk, the jewelry shop sat on a quiet street where old money met new wealth. Its windows displayed diamond necklaces on black velvet, emerald rings under soft lighting, the kind of place where discretion was more valuable than advertising. Thomas and Alina watched from across the street, sitting in Elena's unmarked car as rain began to streak the windshield. The November cold seeped through the windows, but neither of them moved. "There," Alina said, pointing by Peter Collins emerged from a side entrance, lighting a cigarette as he walked. He looked different than Thomas remembered, thinner, with shadows under his eyes and a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. He stood under the awning, smoking and checking his phone with the nervous energy of someone waiting for something. He looked scared, Thomas observed. Or guilty. Alina raised a small camera and took several photos. "Stay here. I'm going to get closer." Before Thomas could protest, she was out of the car, pulling her hood up against the rain. She moved with practiced ease, crossing the street and pausing in front of a neighboring shop window, as if admiring the display. Peter never looked up from his phone. Then a black car pulled to the curb. The rear window lowered just enough for Peter to lean down, speaking to whoever sat inside. The conversation lasted less than a minute. Peter's hand moved to his pocket, pulling out something small, too far away for Thomas to see clearly on past it through the window. In return, an envelope emerged. Money. It had to be money. The window rose, and the car pulled away before Alina could photograph the license plate. Peter stood on the sidewalk, the envelope clutched in his hand, his face a mixture of relief and something darker. Fear, perhaps. Or regret. Alina returned to the car, her hair dripping. "Did you see that?" "Everything." Thomas's mind was racing. He's selling something. But was it the brooch? "Only one way to find out." Lena started the engine. "We follow him." Peter walked 3 blocks before entering a small pub tucked between a bookshop and a dry cleaner. Through the window, Thomas could see him take a corner booth, ordering a drink with shaking hands. The envelope sat on the table in front of him, unopened. "I'm going in," Thomas said. "That's not smart. He doesn't know you, but he knows me. If he's involved, seeing me might shake something loose." Thomas opened the door before Alina could argue further. The pub was warm and dim, smelling of old wood and spilled beer. A football match played on a television above the bar, but only a few patrons watched. Thomas walked directly to Peter's booth and slid into the seat across from him. Peter's head snapped up, his eyes widening. What are you doing here?" Looking for answers, Thomas kept his voice level. "About a missing brooch? About why I'm being framed for something I didn't do." Peter's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." Thomas leaned forward. "I saw you make a handoff just now. I saw the money. Whatever you're involved in, it's not too late to stop." For a moment, Peter said nothing. He stared at the envelope, his jaw working as if chewing words he couldn't speak. Then, quietly, "You ruined my life," reported the truth. "You fell asleep on duty. I'd worked 3 double shifts because my mother was sick and I needed the money." Peter's voice cracked. "One mistake. One time. And you destroyed everything." Thomas felt a twist of unexpected sympathy. "I'm sorry about your mother. But I had a duty." "Duty?" Peter laughed bitterly. "You people with your duty and honor. You have no idea what it's like to be desperate, and help me understand." Thomas watched Peter's face carefully. "Did you take the brooch?" Peter's eyes filled with something that looked like genuine confusion. "What?" "No, I didn't, I wouldn't even know how to get into that case anymore. But you know something?" The silence stretched between them. On the television, someone scored a goal, and the few patrons cheered. Peter picked up his drink with trembling hands and took a long swallow. "I was approached," he finally said. "About 3 weeks ago, a man I didn't know. He asked questions about palace security, about routines, about you specifically. Thomas's blood ran cold. What did you tell him? Everything I could remember. Peter wouldn't meet his eyes. He paid me £500 just for information. Then he came back last week. Said he needed more details about the blue drawing room, about the display case, about when you'd be alone there and you told him I needed the money. Peter's voice was barely a whisper. My mother's treatments, the bills, I didn't think he'd actually do anything. I thought he was just planning something. Maybe a heist that would never happen. Thomas's hands clenched into fists under the table. Describe him. Older, maybe 50s. Expensive suit. Had an accent Eastern European, I think. And a scar here. Peter traced a line along his left cheekbone. He never gave me a name. When did you last see him? This morning. That was him in the car. He paid me the rest of what he promised. Peter pushed the envelope away as if it burned. But he said something strange when he handed it over. He said the job was done, but it wasn't finished. I don't know what that means. Thomas felt ice settle in his stomach. The job was done. The brooch was stolen, and he was framed, but not finished. What else was coming? Where can I find him? Thomas asked. Peter shook his head. I don't know. He always found me. Thomas stood, his mind already moving to the next step. Then he paused, looking down at the young man who'd helped destroy his life out of desperation. Your mother, Thomas said. Is she getting better? Peter's eyes filled with tears. She died 2 weeks ago. Thomas felt the words like a blow. He wanted to be angry. He wanted to hate Peter for what he'd done. But all he felt was a tired, aching sadness for the way desperation turned good people into accomplices. I'm sorry, Thomas said, and meant it. Outside, Alina was waiting. Thomas told her everything as rain hammered the roof of the car. A hired professional, Alina said when he finished. Someone who knows how to frame people and cover tracks. This is bigger than a stolen brooch, Thomas. Then what is it? Alina started the car, her expression grim. I don't know yet, but we're running out of time to find out. They returned to the palace as darkness settled over London. Thomas's 24 hours were slipping away, and all they had was a description of a man with a scar and a mystery that seemed to grow more complex with each answer they found. Margaret met them at the security entrance, her face lined with exhaustion. Tell me you found something. Lena briefed her on Peter Collins and the mysterious man. As she spoke, Margaret's expression shifted from skepticism to concern. Eastern European accent, Margaret repeated. Scar on the left cheek. Professional operator. She was quiet for a moment, thinking. There was an incident 6 months ago. Before your time, Alina, a security consultant was hired to assess our vulnerabilities. He was very thorough. Too thorough, actually. We terminated the contract early because he kept pushing to access areas beyond his clearance. What was his name? Thomas asked. Russian, but working through a London-based security firm. We flagged his behavior and sent a report to MI5, but nothing came of it. As far as we knew, he moved on. Lena was already typing on her phone. Petrov. Viktor Petrov. Let me see what I can find. While Alina searched, Thomas felt a memory tugging at the corner of his mind. Something about that time, 6 months ago? The consultant walking the corridors, asking questions, making notes. Thomas had encountered him once or twice, but they'd barely spoken, except the curator, Thomas said suddenly. James Hartford. He spent time with Petrov, showed him the historical collections, including the blue drawing room. Margaret's eyes narrowed. James has been with us for 15 years. He's beyond reproach. Maybe, but Petrov would have seen the display case. He would have understood its security. And James would have known about my morning routines. You think James is involved? Margaret shook her head. That's a serious accusation. Not accusing anyone. I'm following the thread. Thomas felt the urgency building. Where is James now? Margaret checked her tablet. He left early today. Called in sick. Thomas and Alina exchanged glances. Alina showed them her phone screen. Viktor Petrov. Former Russian military intelligence. Suspected involvement in several high-profile thefts across Europe, but never convicted. Last known location, London, 3 months ago. We need to talk to James, Thomas said. They drove through rain-slicked streets to James Hartford's home in Hammersmith. The house was a narrow Victorian terrace, its windows dark. Thomas knocked, waited, knocked again. No answer, his car's not here, Alina observed, pointing to an empty driveway. There's a back entrance, Thomas said. Through the garden, they circled the house, finding a small gate that opened with a rusty creak. The garden was overgrown, autumn leaves thick on the ground. The back door had a window, and through it, Thomas could see into a dimly lit kitchen. Something was wrong. The kitchen was in disarray. Cabinet doors hung open, drawers pulled out, contents scattered across the floor. It looked like someone had searched the place in a hurry. Call the police, Helena said. But Thomas was already trying the door. It was unlocked. They entered carefully, Elena close behind. The house was silent except for the ticking of a clock somewhere deeper inside. The living room had been torn apart, 2 cushions slashed, books pulled from shelves, a desk ransacked. James? Thomas called. James, are you here? A sound came from upstairs. A thump, followed by what might have been a groan. Thomas took the stairs 2 at a time, Alina right behind him. The bedroom door was ajar, and beyond it, James Hartford lay on the floor, his hands and feet bound with zip ties, a gag in his mouth. Blood trickled from a cut above his eye. Thomas cut him free, while Alina called for an ambulance. James gasped as the gag came away, his breath ragged. They took it, he whispered. They took everything. Who? Thomas helped him sit up. Who did this, James? Petrov. Viktor Petrov. He came here this morning, demanded I tell him where I'd hidden the evidence. James's voice shook. I didn't know what he meant. I swear, I didn't know. Evidence of what? James closed his eyes, tears leaking from the corners. 6 months ago, when Petrov was consulting at the palace, I made a mistake. He asked me questions about the security systems, and I answered them. I thought it was part of his assessment, but he recorded me. He recorded everything I said, then edited it to make it sound like I was helping him plan a theft. Thomas felt the pieces starting to fit together. He was blackmailing you. He sent me the recording 3 weeks ago. Said if I didn't help him, he'd send it to the palace and the police. I'd look like a traitor. I'd lose everything. James wiped his face with a shaking hand. He wanted access to the display case. He wanted to know Thomas's routine, and he wanted me to take the brooch and hide it. The room seemed to tilt. You took the brooch? I had no choice. James's voice cracked. He had my career in his hands, my reputation, everything. So I took it 2 days ago before Thomas's shift, and I hid it exactly where Petrov told me to.
Where?
Alina asked. In the palace library. There's a loose stone behind the 3rd bookshelf. I put it there in a sealed bag. James looked at Thomas with desperate eyes. But when Petrov came here today, he said the brooch was gone. Someone had moved it. He thought I'd double-crossed him. That's when he did this. Thomas's mind raced. If Petrov didn't take it, and you didn't move it, then who someone else knows, Alina said quietly. Someone who knew about the hiding spot. Someone who's been 1 step ahead of all of us. The ambulance arrived, its sirens cutting through the night. As paramedics loaded James onto a stretcher, Thomas stood in the ruined bedroom, trying to see the pattern he was missing. Petrov had orchestrated the theft and the frame-up. James had been his unwilling accomplice. But someone else had taken the brooch from its hiding place, and that person was still out there. The library, Thomas said. We need to check the library now. They left James with the paramedics and drove back to the palace. The building was quieter at night, most of the staff gone home. Their footsteps echoed through the corridors as they made their way to the west wing where the library stood. The room was exactly as Thomas remembered droves of ancient books. Leather chairs, the smell of old paper and wood polish. They went straight to the 3rd bookshelf. Behind it, a stone was indeed loose. Thomas pulled it free, revealing a small, hollow space, empty, but tucked in the corner. Almost missed in the shadows was a piece of paper. Alina pulled it out carefully. On it, written in neat handwriting, was a single sentence. Look where the light always shines, but no one ever sees. Thomas read it 3 times, his exhaustion making the words blur. A riddle. Someone had left them a riddle. What does it mean? Alina asked. Thomas thought of the palace. Its hundreds of rooms, thousands of objects. Where did light shine but no one saw? And then, like a door opening in his mind, he understood. I know where the brooch is, he said. Where? Thomas was already moving toward the door. Somewhere I should have looked from the very beginning. The portrait gallery was silent at midnight. Moonlight streamed through tall windows, painting the faces of long-dead royals in silver and shadow. Thomas walked between them, Alina following close behind, their footsteps muffled by thick carpet. Look where the light always shines, but no one ever sees, Thomas repeated. The portraits. We walk past them every day, but we don't really see them. We don't look at them. And light from the windows, from the chandeliers always shines on them. You think the brooch is hidden in a portrait frame? Alina sounded skeptical. Not in, behind. Thomas stopped in front of a particular painting Queen Victoria in her later years, her expression stern and knowing. This one. It's been crooked for weeks. I've meant to straighten it 12 times, but kept forgetting. He reached up, carefully lifting the heavy frame away from the wall. The back was covered in brown paper, spotted with age, and there, tucked into a corner, where the paper had come loose, was a small, velvet pouch. Thomas's hands trembled as he opened it. The sapphire brooch glinted in the moonlight, its blue depths catching and holding the light as if it were alive. You found it, Alina breathed, but Thomas wasn't celebrating. Something was wrong. The brooch was here, hidden in a place only someone with intimate knowledge of the palace would choose. Someone who walked these halls regularly, someone who knew about Thomas's routines, about the display case, about everything. Who put it here? Thomas asked aloud. James hid it in the library. Petrov never got it. So who moved it and left us that note? Someone who wanted you to find it, Alina said slowly. Someone who knew you'd figure out the riddle. But why not just come forward? Before Thomas could answer, the gallery lights blazed on. Margaret stood at the entrance. And beside her was a woman Thomas had seen around the palace, but never spoken to directly. She was in her 60s, gray hair pulled back, dressed in the simple uniform of housekeeping staff. Her name badge read Claire Sutton. Well done, Thomas, Margaret said. Her voice was warm, almost proud. I knew you'd work it out. Thomas felt confused. You knew? You knew where it was? Claire found it 3 hours ago. Margaret walked toward them, Claire following. She was doing her evening cleaning when she saw someone suspicious in the library. She observed from a distance, saw him remove something from behind the bookshelf, and followed him here. Thomas looked at Claire, who smiled slightly. I've worked here for 38 years, she said in a soft voice. I know every corner of this palace, every hiding spot. I saw that young curator acting strange all week, nervous and jumpy. So I kept my eyes on him. When I saw him take something from the library tonight, I knew it had to be important. But why hide it behind the portrait? Alina asked. Why not bring it straight to security? Claire's expression grew sad. Because I saw who met him in the gallery. I saw who he gave the brooch to before I could stop him. Thomas felt his stomach drop. Who? Margaret answered, her voice heavy. Viktor Petrov. He was in the palace tonight. We don't know how he got in, but he did. James must have arranged access for him one final time. Petrov took the brooch from James, and that's when Claire intervened. I didn't confront him directly, Claire explained. I'm an old woman, not a fool. But I've cleaned this palace for almost 4 decades. I know which floorboards creak, which doors stick, which routes are fastest. I followed him through the service corridors, making noise, making him think security was closing in. He panicked. He needed to hide the brooch quickly before escaping, and he chose the portrait, probably grabbed the first loose frame he saw. Then he ran. We have him on camera leaving through the east service entrance, Margaret added. Police are looking for him now. But Claire watched where he hid it. She left you the note because she knew you needed to be the one to find it. You needed to clear your name yourself. Thomas looked at Claire with new eyes. This quiet woman who emptied bins and polished floors had done what an entire security apparatus couldn't. She'd recovered the stolen treasure and protected his reputation in one careful, brave act. "Why?" Thomas asked. "Why help me?" Claire's smile was gentle. "Because I've watched you for 23 years, Thomas Pemberton. I've seen you stop to talk to the cleaning staff when others walk past us like we're invisible. I've seen you help carry supplies when we're overwhelmed. I've seen you treat every person in this palace with the same respect, from royalty to the woman who scrubs toilets. You're a good man. I wasn't going to let a criminal destroy that." Thomas felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you. I don't know how to know need for speeches." Claire patted his arm. "Just keep being who you are." Margaret held out her hand. "The brooch, Thomas. Let's get it back where it belongs." Thomas handed it over, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders that went beyond the small piece of jewelry. His name was cleared. His reputation was saved. But more than that, he learned something about the palace he'd served for so long. The people who truly saw everything weren't always the ones with badges and authority. Sometimes they were the quiet ones, the invisible ones. The people who moved through the world doing their jobs with dignity and paying attention when others looked away. "There's still Petrov," Alina said. "He's out there, and he knows his plan failed." "Let the police handle Petrov," Margaret said. "He'll be caught. Men like him always are." She turned to Thomas. "Your suspension is lifted. Your record will show you were instrumental in recovering the stolen item, and I'm recommending you for a commendation." Thomas nodded, but his mind was already moving past the crisis. James Hartford. What will happen to him? Margaret's expression grew somber. He'll face consequences for his actions. But given the blackmail and coercion, I suspect they'll be tempered with understanding. He's not a bad man, just a frightened one who made terrible choices. They left the portrait gallery together, the brooch secure in Margaret's custody. As they walked the corridors back toward the security office, Thomas found himself beside Claire. "I meant what I said," he told her quietly. "Thank you. I know you did." Claire's eyes twinkled. "Now, you should go home. Your wife has been calling the palace all evening, worried sick. And your daughter called too from university. They love you very much." Thomas felt tears prick his eyes. After the longest, hardest day of his career, the thought of seeing Anne and hearing Sophie's voice was almost overwhelming. But there was still something nagging at him, something unfinished. "Claire," he said, "the note you left. Look where the light always shines but no one ever sees. How did you know I'd understand?" She smiled. "Because you're the only guard who stops to look at the portraits, Thomas. I've seen you pause in front of them during your rounds, studying the faces, reading the plaques. You see them. You've always seen them." It was true. Thomas had always been drawn to the portraits, to the sense of history they represented. He'd never thought anyone noticed. "You see more than people realize," he said to Claire. "That's the secret of being invisible," she replied. "You see everything." 3 days later, Thomas stood in the blue drawing room once more. The sapphire brooch was back in its place, gleaming on its velvet cushion, as if it had never left. The morning light caught its facets, sending tiny blue shadows across the display case. Kate herself had visited the previous afternoon, speaking privately with Thomas to thank him for his dedication. She'd been kind, her concern genuine, asking if he was truly all right after the ordeal. Thomas had assured her he was, though the truth was more complicated. He was all right. But he was also changed. The palace felt different now. Or perhaps Thomas felt different in it. He walked the same corridors, checked the same locks, but he saw more. He noticed the housekeeping staff and stopped to ask about their families. He nodded to the kitchen workers and learned their names. He realized how many people kept the palace running while remaining invisible to most who passed through. Alina had stayed in touch, sending him updates on the investigation. Viktor Petrov had been arrested trying to board a flight to Moscow. He'd been carrying false documents and a substantial amount of cash. Under questioning, he'd confessed to the entire scheme to blackmail, the theft, the frame-up. He'd been hired by a private collector who specialized in stolen royal artifacts. Though that part of the investigation was still unfolding, James Hartford had resigned and was cooperating fully with authorities. Thomas had visited him once, in the small apartment where James was staying during the legal proceedings. The curator had looked broken, older somehow, but grateful for Thomas's willingness to hear his side. "I was weak," James had said, his voice hollow. "I should have come forward immediately when Petrov first contacted me, but I was terrified of losing everything I'd built. Ironic, isn't it? Trying to protect my reputation by destroying it." Thomas had understood. Fear made people do desperate things. It didn't excuse the choices, but it explained them. Peter Collins had also reached out, sending a letter to the palace addressed to Thomas. In it, he'd apologized again, explained that he was seeking therapy for his grief, and thanked Thomas for treating him with kindness in the pub that night. "You could have hated me," he'd written. "You had every right. But you showed me grace I didn't deserve. I won't forget it." Now, standing in the quiet drawing room, Thomas heard footsteps behind him. He turned to find Claire pushing a cleaning cart, her movements practiced and efficient. "Morning, Thomas," she said with a warm smile. "Morning, Claire." He stepped aside to give her room. "How's your grandson? The one starting secondary school?" Her smile widened. "Thriving. Joined the football team. He's all he talks about." "That's wonderful." They chatted for a few minutes, an easy conversation about ordinary things. When Claire moved on to the next room, Thomas realized this was what had changed. Not the palace, not his job, but his awareness of the people around him. He'd always been kind, always respectful, but he'd also been somewhat isolated in his sense of duty. Now he understood that duty wasn't just about protecting buildings and treasures. It was about protecting the people who made those spaces come alive. His radio crackled. "Thomas, this is Margaret. Can you come to the security office?" "On my way." Margaret was waiting with a file folder when he arrived. "Sit down," she said, and something in her tone made Thomas's chest tighten. "Is something wrong?" "The opposite, actually." Margaret opened the folder. "You know, the palace has been discussing reorganizing the security structure, creating a new position head of personnel security. Someone who would focus not just on physical security, but on the well-being and oversight of all palace staff. Background checks, conflict resolution, preventing internal threats before they develop." Thomas listened, unsure where this was going. "We want you for the position," Margaret said. "Your instincts during this incident were excellent. More importantly, your relationships with the staff are exemplary. People trust you, Thomas. They respect you. Those qualities can't be taught." Thomas sat back, stunned. "I'm honored, but I'm not sure I'm qualified for. You're exactly who we need." Margaret's expression was firm. "The palace is changing. We need people who understand that security isn't just about locks and cameras. It's about people. It's about creating an environment where everyone feels valued and seen. You already do that naturally." Thomas thought of Claire, watching over the palace for nearly 4 decades. He thought of all the staff members he'd never truly noticed until this crisis forced him to see them. He thought of Peter Collins, driven by desperation because no one had checked on his well-being, and James Hartford, too afraid to ask for help because he thought his reputation mattered more than the truth. Except Thomas said, "But on one condition." "What's that?" "I want Claire Sutton involved. Maybe as a consultant or advisor. She knows this palace and its people better than anyone. We'd be fools not to use that knowledge." Margaret smiled. "Already ahead of you. Claire and I had tea yesterday. She's agreed to mentor whoever takes this position. Said she'd only do it if it was you, though." Thomas felt warmth spread through his chest. "When do I start?" "Next month. You'll keep your current duties until we can train your replacement." Margaret stood, extending her hand. "Congratulations, Thomas. You've earned this." They shook hands, and Thomas left the office feeling lighter than he had in months. He walked through the palace, seeing it with fresh eyes, not just the grand rooms and priceless art, but the people who kept it alive. The cleaners, the cooks, the gardeners, the guards, all of them part of something larger than themselves. His phone buzzed. A text from Anne. "Sophie's coming home this weekend. She wants to celebrate your news. Told her I'd make your favorite dinner. Love you. Proud of you. Always have been. Thomas smiled, typing back a response. Then he paused in the portrait gallery, standing before Queen Victoria's stern face. He straightened the frame carefully, making sure it was perfectly level. Thank you, he whispered to the painted eyes that had witnessed his darkest moment, and, in their way, helped reveal the truth. The light from the windows shifted, touching the portrait's edge, making it seem almost alive for just a moment. Thomas continued his rounds, the weight of the past week finally lifting. He'd been tested in ways he'd never imagined, accused of crimes he hadn't committed, and forced to confront his own blindness to the quiet heroes around him. But he'd come through it. Not alone, never alone, but supported by people he'd overlooked, and protected by someone he'd never suspected would be his greatest ally. The palace felt like home. Again, as he turned the corner toward the east wing, he caught a glimpse of Claire in a distant corridor, methodically polishing a brass railing. She looked up, caught his eye, and gave him a small nod. Thomas nodded back. In the end, the royal guard had found Kate's missing jewelry. But more importantly, he'd found something he hadn't known was lost. A deeper understanding of what it meant to truly serve. To truly see and to truly value every person whose path crossed his. The brooch was back where it belonged. And so was Thomas. The mystery of who had put it in that unlikely place, behind a portrait where light always shone but no one looked, would become palace legend. A story told two new staff members about the housekeeper, who saw everything, and the guard who learned to do the same. Some stories end with dramatic confrontations or last-minute revelations. This one ended with something quieter, but no less profound, with recognition, with gratitude, and with the understanding that heroism often comes from the most unexpected places, and sometimes the most unlikely place to find something precious isn't a hiding spot at all. It's in the people we've walked past 1,000 times without truly seeing, until the moment we finally do.